Hey, everybody, welcome to a bonus Wednesday edition of the Shea Anything podcast. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you twice in a week for the first time this offseason. This will be fun because since we last spoke, we had the 90-minute news conference yesterday between Steve Cohen, Sandy Alderson. They both fielded a lot of questions. We got a sense of both of them. And Andy was, it was interesting that Andy pointed this out on SNY yesterday before the news conference started, that we had not really heard Steve Cohen speak. And this was not only a public appearance of his, but really the first one where we were able to hear his thoughts as the Mets owner. The first time that we've really, other than Twitter, really heard the type of guy he will be as the owner in this role. So first off, Andy, just a quick summary thought on what you heard yesterday.
Well, it was clear that what Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson said resonated with the public and even with some players. As a sales pitch to Marcus Stroman, it appears to have worked because Strowman tweeted that he was fired up about coming back to the team after accepting the qualifying offer. He tweeted that. He said the presser, Steve Cohen's presser, got him fired up. So if that's true, that was successful right there to get some starting rotation depth out of that news conference, excuse me. And that is something that has value. He said clearly all the right things that fans wanted to hear. And I haven't seen one bit of negative reaction to it really anywhere. So clearly a successful first presentation.
Yeah, I would say my reaction to both of them was, if I can keep it to a sentence or a couple sentences each, Steve Cohen kind of wanted to portray himself, and I think he did it successfully, as a relatable Met fan who happens to have $14 billion. Right. And I think Sandy Alderson's vibe was almost shocking. It was like he was relaxed. He was super chatty and talkative and seemed genuinely happy to be there in the role that he is. And really happy to be attached to Steve Cohen in this project. And we'll get into some of the sound bites in a second. We'll play it for you and react on the other side. First, though, just want to remind you, weeknights at 6 o'clock on SNY, Baseball Night in New York. We did an hour-long show last night reacting to all the pressers, but for the news conferences. But we're there every weeknight for a half hour talking Mets and Yankees baseball and all the big league happenings, especially in what should be a really interesting off season. And then Mets Hot Stove premieres tonight, 6:30 p.m. Then every Wednesday at 6:30, right after Baseball Night in New York, will be Mets Hot Stove. Andy will be there tonight. So let's play some sound bites and we'll react. The first one was, I thought, really interestingly off the cuff by Steve Cohen. Kind of, not projecting or predicting necessarily, but telling us what he hopes will come of his ownership tenure early on.
Only one team wins the World Series every year, right? So that's a pretty high bar. Mm-hmm. But if I don't win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years, I'd like to make it sooner. Then obviously, I would consider that slightly disappointing.
Yeah, Andy, I just thought, rarely do you hear anybody say that. And Sandy's reactions to it were funny. He basically said, that's a little bit scary because he's won one and it was 31 years ago. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Lots to unpack there. It just occurred to me that I didn't even think of when I heard it was, I just thought interesting observation. When Alderson talked about winning the 1989 World Series, he said, we've won a World Series once in my time in the game. And Cohen said, I'm going to win a World Series. So I thought that was an interesting contrast between the collective and then the individual way to think of that. I thought more broadly that all right, gosh, it's so hard to know where to start here. There's a fascinating moment. I'll say this. If you want to be the East Coast Dodgers, as we've said that, and then Cohen himself pointed to the Dodgers now as a model organization. The Guggenheim Group bought the Dodgers in 2012, immediately infused them with resources, made them perennial contenders, all kinds of NLCS appearances. Dodgers are good at just about every year under that ownership, but it took them until 2020 to win a World Series because World Series are inherently fluky and almost impossible to engineer. It's a tough goal to have. And I'll say that within the industry, winning the World Series is not really a goal. It's a nice, wonderful thing to have happen, but I think it probably means more to fans and players than it does to front offices, generally speaking. The Rays, the Yankees, and the Dodgers are generally regarded as the top three smartest and most successful organizations in the game. How many championships combined do those franchises have over the past 11 years? Go ahead, Doug. Take this one.
They have one.
Exactly. The industry does not judge success based on World Series titles. So for an owner to come in and say 3 to 5 years World Series title, that's a George Steinbrenner mentality. He was a different kind of owner. It was like, we have to win championships and that's the goal. That's great catnip to the fans. And look, they might win the World Series in 2021. I'm not saying that that's a ridiculous thing. The Mets can't win a World Series in 3 to 5 years. I'm saying, wow, you want to model yourself against the Dodgers and be like several years ahead of their timetable with that ownership group. Very aggressive.
Yeah. So you said last 11 years. So I guess that would be 2 if you include.
I was thinking from 2010 to this year, 11 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
right.
I agree with you. And I think it shows, Andy, I don't necessarily even think that Steve Cohen is placating to the fans or, just trying to give them the soundbite that they want, which is, just making the playoffs isn't good enough.
I agree. I think he meant it.
I think he means it because he's coming from that background. He is not a guy who just bought the team and had to Google what should I say that Mets fans will like. He's coming at it from the perspective where he has not been in the front office. He doesn't understand that, as you said, teams across baseball view the Dodgers as a team that's there every year. They're at least in the discussion every year, and that's the goal. He's like, well, why would I want to lose in the DS if I can win the World Series? That the goal is to be the last team to win. So we've spent a lot of time talking about whether he'd be Jerry Jones or George Steinbrenner or what. And that is maybe our first glimpse at the fact that Sandy's going to have to be like, look, we didn't make it. This team got really hot. This wildcard team beat us. That doesn't mean that we weren't the best team in the big leagues,
Right. Well,
those are the conversations
exactly.
they're going to have.
You know what? Another moment as we're talking this through that I remember now sort of revealed that too. I think he said, I finished second in buying the Dodgers. And then he was like, as an aside, he's like, which means nothing. I believe he's talking about buying the Dodgers and finishing second. So clearly finishing first is very much on this guy's mind. And look, he's obviously succeeded in that in his life, whether it's building up his fund or there's stories of him buying art when he would not be outbid for a certain Picasso or Giacometti. He's a guy that is very much programmed to win. All the reporting and reading and research I've done on him as a boss at his various funds is like, he is tough. If you have a great year one year, you get a big bonus. And if you lose the fund money the next year, you might be out. And so that is consistent with the research that I've done, and it's available on Cohen, is that whereas Hal Steinbrenner might be like, gosh, I wish we'd beaten the Rays this year. However, I appreciate that you've assembled an excellent roster and depth in the farm system, and the organization's in good shape, and let's go get them next year. Try harder. Cohen might be like a little bit more forceful if you lose in the division series. That's the impression I get.
Meanwhile, WFAN callers are want Cashman and Boone and the Steinbrenner family gone. And in reality, it's another year, another playoff team. And one of these years they'll be World Series victors. But
if I may, sorry to interrupt you, but when I used to root for teams, what I used to really want, of course you desperately want a championship, but I would always root for let this be relevant as long into the fall as I can. Then let me please have one round. Then let me please have another round, then another round. And by the time you get to the World Series, if you could win this thing, great. But I was a Braves fan growing up. I had an amazing experience year in, year out rooting for a great team. And they got one title. That's just the way it goes. They're so hard to come by.
Okay, so Sandy talked about being iconic and what that means, and we wanted to play that soundbite for you.
A vision for new ownership to create an iconic major league franchise respected for its success, competitive and financial success, and how it achieves that success, and for its commitment to fans and community. So, okay, it's a vision statement. You start to unpack that. And as I said before, we want to be iconic. The Mets have a chance to do that. I'm not sure you can be iconic in most parts of the United States, regardless of, it's hard to do in a place that's not New York or Chicago or LA. It's been done, but we have that opportunity in part because we're well located. But in order to get there, we've got to be sustainably excellent. That's the way we get there. The Mets are they're a storied franchise, if you will. Some of the stories have been good, some of them have been bad. And if we want to be an iconic franchise, which I think we are capable of doing, we have to write more good stories than bad, and occasionally we have to write a really epic story. And that's what excites me about these next few months and years, because I think we have the chance to do that.
I loved that, and I've always found it funny that whenever free agents or managers, they get introduced at a news conference, a lot of times they say, "I'm thrilled to be joining a storied franchise," and sometimes I'm like, "Are they really that storied?" The Mets have 2 World Series championships, both of them equally memorable, but they are not an iconic franchise, and I think you could make the argument that story just kind of means old and that they've been around for a while. And Sandy's mission statement, the vision statement that he read, was a really genuine appeal, I think, to Mets fans, that it's not just like, hey, we want to win a World Series in the next 3 or 5 years. This is going to be a team that's good for a long time.
Yeah, I thought that was really eloquent and evidence of some really deep thinking on Sandy's part. Probably my favorite part of the 90 minutes or so between the two of them, because he was really parsing the difference in a way that I'd never thought of. And this is somebody who also used the word love at one point, which is very emotive for Sandy Alderson, when he said there are people in the Mets organization that actually love. And I thought that there was love evident in that part of the statement too, because he cares enough about the Mets. And look, he wants the job. He wants to come back in, and there's always going to be some ego there with somebody who wants to finish the job and all that. So it's not all totally pure. But this part of it, I think, was really authentic, and he wants the Mets to be a team that is respected for not only what they do, but how they do it, and become a gold standard type team in a way that they've really never, ever been in a sustained way. Probably the closest they came was the late 80s, when they almost had a dynasty and then were derailed by drugs and other disappointments. And Alderson wants to start a period of sustained respect and winning. And I had never thought of the difference between sustained and iconic. I just thought that was really interesting. It really made me stop and think. It was so far from boilerplate, corporate, news conference, bullet point stuff that, it was really like deeply thought out, I thought.
Yeah. Then back to Cohen. There's an interesting piece of symmetry here, because Andy, in your reporting on this, back to our projections in terms of what kind of owner he would be, you kept using the phrase drunken sailor. Now, I don't know if drunken sailors are known as being big spenders.
Mm-hmm.
I know the song "What You Gonna Do with a Drunken Sailor."
Oh, that's a good one.
Do they
actually? Yes.
I don't know if sailors get drunk and just go spend like crazy, but the saying is that whether Steve Cohen was going to spend like a drunken sailor, and Andy's used that phrase multiple times on the podcast, and wouldn't you know it, Steve Cohen used the exact same one yesterday.
I can promise you we're going to act, like I said, like a major market team. Are we going to act like drunken sailors, in the marketplace? No. Okay. So, listen, I want to be thoughtful. You can spend a lot of money today and then tie up your team in bad contracts for the next 5 years. Okay, which, so that's part of building sustainable franchise. You want to make decisions, not what works for the next, 60 games, but works for the next few years. And so, we want to be thoughtful about it. I think we're in an unusual market today, given COVID, where a lot of teams might, and we're starting to see players, maybe being offloaded because of financial concerns. And I think Sandy and I want to take advantage of that. So I think there'll be lots of opportunities. I think teams are going to want to talk to us, and we'll see what's available.
Yeah, that was interesting stuff from Steve Cohen. And I think we kind of joked around that he gave us a glimpse at the potential WFAN fan caller version of himself earlier. Mm-hmm. But he also said, and I'm paraphrasing, I think, but he may have said this word for word, that you don't buy, championships, you build them, something along those lines. He clearly has an understanding that when he says he likes what the Dodgers are doing, it's choosing really carefully which players you want to pay big money. Other than that, it's building from the bottom up in your farm system and spending money in the right places, and international scouting and health and wellness and all of the things and analytics and all the things that the Mets may not have had a ton of employees in these departments earlier. He's going to focus on the things that really matter. And so I think Steve Cohen deserves some credit for having the awareness that that's not how it works, that you just don't spend to build.
Yeah, as you pointed out, I feel bad for the frugal drunken sailor, because he's really getting a bad rap here. Or even the drunken sailor who's just cheap and lets his other friends.
Right, the drunken sailor who goes to the dollar store and finds some bargains, and that's it.
But the drunken sailor who is an aggressive spender clearly is not the type of person who will be hired as the president of baseball operations. Look, we've been saying this for a long time. The kind of a Met fan that expected Steve Cohen was going to come in with his $14 billion and buy up all the fun free agents is going to be sorely disappointed. He's too smart, clearly, to run a business like that. He wouldn't have been successful in whatever else he was doing if he ran businesses like that. And he doesn't hire Sandy Alderson to run businesses like that. Make no mistake, Alderson knows how to spend, as he himself pointed out, I believe, yesterday. He had the highest payroll in baseball in Oakland at one point. But it's targeted spending. And I think we talked about this on a prior podcast, but and then they said Cohen said it explicitly now, is that they're going to be spending a lot of money on non-tenders and guys cut by other teams like Brad Hand. It's going to be a lot of spending like that. And that's good. I'd probably rather have 3 or 4 really good players like that than one JT Realmuto if you made me pick. And I think that's the way they're going to go, is spread it around.
One of the other things that you've talked about, and you mentioned Strowman's name earlier on the podcast, but this all connects, right? So we've talked about Cohen not just spending like a drunken sailor, but taking advantage of the marketplace that he was not a part of when these owners across baseball were taking losses last year. He now has the ability to pay guys that other teams don't want to. Now, we heard Sandy Alderson mention Brad Hand's name yesterday, which was really interesting, that he was just using a specific player's name and somebody that he was interested in. But Marcus Stroman took the qualifying offer today. And what that is Stroman, whether or not you want to look into it and say Stroman loved the news conference and loved what Sandy and Cohen were saying and would just really wanted to be a part of the Mets franchise, I tend to think it was more about Strowman and his representation looking around at the market, realizing he was not going to get the long-term multi-year deal that he wanted originally.
Doug, I don't interrupt you, but Strowman had a 5-year offer on the table. He told his agent to say no to after that news conference.
Let's just
not really
clarify
everybody.
That you're kidding. So that's the first example of, and Steve Cohen tweeted at Strowman after and was like, Marcus, thrilled to hear this. I'll be calling you in the next couple of days. And Strowman said, I was fired up watching the news conference yesterday. All of these things might lead you to build it into one big talking point and storyline. But That is an example of the Mets, giving a qualifying offer that was good business, the right thing to do, but that they're taking advantage of a marketplace already. So it's not bad money, but it might be an off season of some smaller short-term deals and taking advantage of this.
Yeah, and Marcus Stroman probably doesn't, an analytics department probably doesn't add him up to $18.9 million. And one of the things that they're able to do under Cohen is to say, yeah, whatever, we need a starter. If he's worth, if our analytics folks would say he's worth, I'm just throwing out a number, 13 or 14 in the marketplace, just give him the 18.9, keep him around. That's kind of the luxury that Sandy's working with right now.
Yeah, he basically Steve Cohen thanked Marcus Stroman for taking his $18.9 million.
If he wants to feel more gratitude towards someone, I would be happy to accept the same amount.
No longer just the Fresh Prince shrugging.
No, it's a concrete answer. I have a question for you. When Cohen, you probably noticed this because you were very good about aesthetics. Like, you have a real eye for this kind of thing. When Cohen tweets, there's like extra spaces in weird places and like just some it's not very careful typing. And I know I'm guilty of this too, so I'll leave that aside.
I was about to say, people in glass houses, Andy, you know what
it's
they
not
say
a criticism.
about them.
I'm actually wondering if you think that's kind of a subtle power move, like the sweater. Most people would wear a suit to a news conference. He's wearing a sweater because I was like, I'm worth $14 billion. I'm comfortable in a sweater. Do you think that his typing style is also evidence of a certain kind of swag?
I would not read that deeply into it. I just think he's probably on his phone and not paying too much attention to it.
Well, that's what happens to me. So that's a reasonable explanation.
And also, when he's not alone, super, super rich guys don't dress for the rest of us. They dress for themselves.
That's what I'm saying. That's a swaggy move. Like, you're able to dress down because no one can tell you otherwise. You and I are not.
By the way, Andy, I'm not positive of this, but you know me in aesthetics. I do think he was wearing like a Brunello Cucinelli sweater yesterday, which is probably worth like $1,000. So
okay,
let's not say he was dressed down.
You know what? That's fair, but it's a pointed that hedge fund look. It's dressed down from. I've never seen a news conference like this where the principals weren't decked out in expensive suits. So it's a choice, and I believe it's a swaggy choice. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so let's move back to Sandy. This is him talking about how managing the game is the easy part.
I think Louis has the personal side nailed down. He's a great person. I've known him for a long time. He has those qualities that engender respect and loyalty and commitment. You know, sometimes you win or lose not based on individual performance. It's the commitment that players have to their teammates and to their leadership. I think Louis got all that. He would probably admit that he's got a lot to learn as a manager of a major league team between the lines. But honestly, that's the easy part. And we need to make sure that he has people around him who can help him do that. So the only reason I didn't shut the door on all this speculation is because we are going to hire somebody on the baseball side, and they need to have some input into this decision.
Managing the game is the easy part, but it's the only part that we see. It's the only part that the fan base sees the manager, doing. So I thought that was probably correct and interesting. And what does your reporting dictate, Andy, in terms of are we to believe 100% that Sandy's leaving the door ajar for whoever the GM is in terms of what he or she wants to do at the manager's role, but that it sounds like Rojas will be back?
The door is ajar, but if the guy that hires you says Rojas is very likely to be the manager, you're probably not going to come into the organization guns blazing with insisting on a different choice, especially because Rojas is not somebody who they're committed to for many years. Mets could very easily replace him after this coming year if they feel at that time that it's necessary. But I don't believe there's any good reason not to give him another year to continue to grow in that job. And it's fortunate for the Mets that Alderson sees it the same way, because everything he said, I think, was dead on. it's the human part of managing that can't be taught, and it makes a manager special. And that manifests in a million different ways. The first beat that I ever covered was the Charlie Manuel era Phillies. And in like a very old school kind of country way, he was so amazingly good with players. He would, like, Jimmy Rollins would come in late, even as the star, even of a guy of a different generation, a different race, a different culture, would bench him. And Rollins would be like, all right, Skip, you got me. Like, I should have been on time. And then he'd come in and pat him on the butt when he did something good. Like, the guy just had such a human touch that is what made Charlie Manuel a great manager, and nothing to do with his X's and O's. Then I get to New York and I'm covering Jerry Manuel, who had not a feel for people in that way. He's pissing guys off all the time. John Maine was in a slump once, and a reporter said, Jerry, what do you think can help John Maine pitch better? And he goes, I don't know, maybe pitch left-handed. And John Maine went ballistic because he felt disrespected because of this offhand wise-ass comment. And so Rojas has got that touch. They get the right analytics people around him. They get him the right bench coach. You could do the X's and O's, but he's got the thing that can't be learned.
You know, that all the things you're describing, that's why you hire a guy like Tony La Russa. You want that that human feel. The White Sox, they nailed it.
He had it once. There's the La Russa Cardinals were famous for this, like, us against them mentality, which is all about, like, if you hit one of our guys, we're gonna hit two of your guys. And it was like real, like, this bully hard thing, and it worked for them at a time. But I think possibly, Doug, the culture of the game has changed in recent years.
Yeah, and he is aged. He's, that's not what we're here to talk about. Last one. This was, I think, related to what Strowman has tweeted about today, but not just what he's tweeted about. How people are viewing the decision to come to the New York Mets. For anybody out there who wants to express themselves, for somebody like Don Smith who expressed himself in 2020, this was an interesting thing for Steve Cohen to talk about and explain his thoughts on. This is Cohen talking about players expressing themselves on social issues. Take a listen.
I think these are important questions that, America is discussing. Black lives do matter. I feel it's really important that we have a diverse group of employees, not just for the sake of diversity, but for the sake of diversity of thought. People come from different backgrounds. And I think it makes for a much more richer environment to have people from, different walks of life. If my players want to express themselves, they're entitled to do it. It's freedom of speech. The only thing I ask for is, if they're going to do it, just make sure when you're between the lines, you give 100%.
I thought he nailed that answer. I was a bit confused how those two thoughts had to do with each other at the end.
Which ones? I mentioned on that because I haven't thought about that too. You first.
How it's related when players express themselves and how hard they play.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought that was strange. Maybe it's not. Again, there was a lot of off the cuff stuff, and maybe it's not entirely what he meant the way that I'm reading it. But I thought that wanting an organization to be diverse, he certainly gave the right reasons for that. Another one being that New York, Queens, where you're located, is diverse. It should not be an organization full of old men and quarter zips. It's just not what New York is. It's not what Queens is. So what were your thoughts on that answer, and what do you think the baseball ramifications could be?
Well, I struggled a little with that answer in some ways, but I also talked to some other people because I wasn't the target demographic for that answer. I thought that their Black players and fans were the ones that needed to resonate with. So I reached out to some people and had some conversations like, how did you guys feel about that answer? And the answers I got back were that people appreciated it. Admittedly, the bar is very low for what a billionaire or an MLB owner in particular might have to say about the Black Lives Matter movement. those weren't particularly necessarily, like, he didn't go very far out on a limb there in any way, shape, or form of progressive support for activism. But, and this is the part where I'm not actually going to criticize him, even though it might sound like I am. The feedback I got back from asking some people I know is that it's important for somebody in that position to sit up there and say Black lives do matter. You can pick apart some of the things that came after as he went, and as you said, to be fair, extemporaneous thoughts. I also was like, why does effort level when you're competing have anything to do with expressing yourself on? It's like, why are you saying that? But I think the main takeaway there was that it seemed to be largely appreciated that he was willing to say Black lives do matter from his position. And that's a start. The bar is low for people in his position, but that was a start.
Yeah, maybe the thesis of what he's saying is express yourselves. The only thing that I need you to do is play hard, do what I'm paying you to do. Other than that, you could do whatever you want. And he ended up kind of making it seem like effort level was connected to expressing yourself, which I don't think is true. But maybe he's just saying, as long as you do your job,
yeah,
be who you are. And that is certainly, I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it is very important. So we're deconstructing this as if it was a written document. So I think that your point was very well taken, that you're speaking off the cuff, and so it's hard to parse every word. But so I think the takeaway is that he said Black lives do matter as a billionaire hedge fund guy, owner of a sports team. It's certainly more than some arch conservative and not supportive MLB owners would do.
So Sandy had some comments about Trevor Bauer. This was after the 90-minute presser on WFAN, where he talked about how baseball is the entertainment business, and that Trevor Bauer is entertaining, and that he thinks he would work in New York. As always, Bauer and his agent Rachel Luba were on Twitter, and Rachel said, I believe, Sandy Alderson gets it.
Yeah.
And Bauer had a very sarcastic response about how, no, like, he doesn't get it. This Bauer guy's a total head case. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Does any of this matter? Does any of this matter?
Yes.
I mean,
yes, it does. We found out yesterday that the Mets and Trevor Bauer have mutual interest. That's how we used to word stories like that before everyone was just tweeting on their own and making reporters like me, relatively irrelevant. It's like Sandy goes on the radio, says we like Bauer. That's definitely new information. And then the agent saying that the GM gets it is also new information. If I'm hearing all those things privately on the phone from those two parties, I'm probably writing a story that says the Mets and Bauer have some early mutual interest. So yeah, sure, that was newsworthy.
So basically, you're saying that you're irrelevant.
I'm getting there. I mean,
I'm you know me, I'm just SNY's talking haircut. So I mean,
no, was it talking? That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, you're the talking haircut. Yeah.
So, last thing I want to ask you about. It was one of the first things that
suit.
It's true. One of the first things that I said at the top of the podcast was that, Sandy much better than I do. But my impression of Sandy was that he felt loose, happy, really, other than maybe when he got to celebrate in 2015, the happiest that I've seen him. And our producer, Jeff, is just obsessed with where Sandy is now compared to where he used to be, and how he's now back in the organization in a very different place. And it is a big story. Jeff's just obsessed with it. He might unmute in this Zoom and just talk about it for the next 15 minutes. But really, he's come full circle in the organization, and now is in charge of everybody other than Steve Cohen in the organization. Was your read that this is a different guy who's really happy to be here, even at 72 years old?
Not a different guy, but a version of him that I did get to see from time to time. When you cover a team on a beat, and the GM as a human being, like, Sandy is, you do get to see him in unfiltered moments for sure. But he has a lot of different moods, and he has some darker moods too. And I've seen those. I've been yelled at by him and seen him grouchy and all these kinds of things. And a lot of times I'm sure there were reasons for that I had no one else around him had any idea of. There were definitely frustrating times for him in the organization. So what we see now is a guy who's in charge. He has so much more power than he had last time. It's incomparable. The GM is ahead of one department, a very important department, baseball operations, but one silo in an organization. This guy is now overseeing the whole thing. If he wants to hire a new head of food services, that is his call. Before, he wouldn't have touched anything like that. So I think he's very happy to do that. I think that he was not happy with how he left last time and is now able to come back triumphantly, well received by the media and by his colleagues internally. He's well liked by most people. Not like, it's not all just wonderful all the time with him. Many employees in that building have been screamed at by Sandy Alderson, sometimes probably unfairly, but they all think he's a really good person and a solid guy and someone who they can get behind working for. So I'm losing myself in this thought a little bit. Sorry. But I think that, I guess the best parts of him are the ones that we saw in public display. And I've been fortunate to see those sides myself. And I think that we'll see that a lot more often now.
And he'll yell at you again. He's not
sure
just going to be, he's not, again, I just had this feeling that we're going to look back at this period of time and this is the honeymoon phase. We'll look back and be like, remember when Steve Cohen was so into this and had just bought the team and was tweeting like, thanks Marcus Stroman for signing your qualifying offer. Like, remember that, remember what that was like.
Yeah.
We are going to think that just because the face of the organization is changing. I mean, they could decide tomorrow to change the logo. They could rename the ballpark. Like, it is different. The Mets organization is different, but that does not mean that come May, when they've lost 6 games in a row, that it won't feel exactly the same. And I'm not even trying to paint a dark picture. 162 game season, there are good times and bad. I think the Mets organization is going to probably win in the next 5 years than they did in the last 5, but that does not mean it's going to be all rainbows and butterflies. This is an interesting time, and Sandy will yell at other people again. He'll yell at you again, but yesterday he seemed really, really into it, and good for him because he's worked hard to get here.
I heard him scream at David Wright once, along with a couple other people. I mean, if he's going to scream at David Wright, he'll scream at anybody. I'm going to tell a story with a curse word in it, and Jeff can beep it later. This is a pretty fun story. There was the first year that there was the new Buster Posey rule at the plate, or one of the very first years. The Mets had a very important play. I believe Jared Saltalamacchia was the catcher. We were in Miami. They were playing the Marlins. There was a very important play at the plate in which the rule was vague, and the call went against the Mets, and the replay went against the Mets. And the media's in the clubhouse, and Sandy's in Terry Collins' office, which is right on top of the locker room, so you could hear it. And he's yelling and screaming and ranting and raving. Why didn't we win that challenge? What's wrong with it? Blah, 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 this bleeping rule. And then David Wright, as the captain, walks into the office thinking he can smooth things over. And he goes, Sandy, I think we should call the union and maybe they could help us out to interpret this. And Sandy goes, the union? It's the fucking union's fault in the first place that we're in this mess. And everyone's going, whoa. And David just kind of walks out of the office with his tail between his legs. And then when Alderson comes out to talk to the press, he's projecting about it because we all heard him screaming. He's got to talk to us now. And he's back to his measured persona. But if you look at his arm, he was twisting a piece of skin on his arm, which must be his technique to maintain his temper and keep himself calm. It's his face that's on camera on SNY is well, blah, 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 blah. But he's digging into his arm with his hand. So he has a temper.
Wow. So
can we air any of that? Did I ruin it with the curse?
No, yeah, we can air it all. Okay. But
I've never told that story.
Steve Cohen, you don't get to where he's gotten. You don't make as much money as he's made without having an edge to you. And you described that earlier. And Sandy Alderson, you don't stay in baseball for this long. You don't stay relevant for this long in this game that's evolving and changing every year without having an edge to you. So maybe that similarity that they see in themselves is part of why they work. And it's
a good point.
All right. Well, this has been informative, Andy. Really good stuff for our listeners to kind of recap everything that we heard on such an important day in the history of this organization and this franchise. We'll be back with you next week. Andy will be here without me. I don't know who will take my place. You'll just have to tune in and figure it out. So thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next week.